Welcome to the Holy Post. Do you remember when churches were seeker-sensitive? The goal was to grow by welcoming newcomers, skeptics, and even non-believers. But now it seems some evangelical churches and denominations are far more worried about ideological purity than outreach. Sociologist and political scientist Ryan Burge is back to talk about the self-defeating trend toward subtraction rather than addition in the church. Also this week, the Southern Baptists decide not to ban all women pastors yet. Then Megan Basham claims evangelical leaders aren't selling out to conservative constituents, but to gain the approval of liberal elites. Death cafes are opening in LA, and the Swiss are making tiny computers from brain cells. What could possibly go wrong? Beyond this episode, we have a lot of fun going on at HOLYPOST Plus. A new episode of Getting Schooled by Caitlin Chess is dropping today about what we should do when we discover a brilliant theologian is actually a sinful disaster. And every Friday, there's a brand new SkyPod episode. This week, it's a full hour of me answering your questions. To join the HOLYPOST Plus community and support the work we're doing, be sure to visit holypost.com. All right, here is episode 622.
Hey there, this is Phil Vischer. Welcome back to the HOLYPOST podcast. I'm here with Caitlin Chess. Hi, Caitlin.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Caitlin. And not Sky Jitani, not Mike Erie, not Caitlin Beatty, Esau McCauley. Hi, Esau.
Thank you. I'm recording back in the United States, probably less than a mile from where you are.
I know. Wow, it's fantastic.
Welcome back.
I think I can hear your voice actually through the open window. That's how close we are.
My wife said, can't you just record it at the Holy Post? I was like, actually, we don't have room for two people to record in this thing.
No. And it's very hard to make the place quiet enough to record. It's not great. But we won't be there much longer because it was a rental for a year and a half or something. And the rental's coming to an end and we'll be in a different space. Also, we hope in lovely downtown Wheaton, Illinois. For people coming into town who want to visit and say, "Oh, where's Caitlin? Where's Caitlin?" She doesn't.
Not there.
She doesn't live here. Esau's back from London. Was it London? No, it was Oxford. So
Oxford.
Yeah, Oxford, not London. Oxford. But you did an event in London where you met listeners to the Holy Post.
Yes, I was telling them before we started recording. I did an event in London. I've done an event in Houston and an event in Seattle. And every place I've gone, people have said, "Oh, Holy Post! I heard you on the Holy Post. I love the Holy Post." So you all are international in the love that you all. The Holy Post
it's amazing. And Caitlin can't even walk down the street anymore. She's just mobbed by adoring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's the Beyonce of female theologians.
Durham's the hotbed of evangelical.
Totally.
Podcast listeners.
Totally. Okay, enough of that. It's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Caitlin. Today's episode is sponsored by Sundays. This is Phil. I have a dog. You have a dog. We love our dogs, and we gotta feed them something. Fresh food with human-grade ingredients is a better way to treat our dogs than that old bag of whatever that stuff is. Sawdust and cow bones? I have no idea. But fresh pet food is expensive and inconvenient, and that's where Sundays comes in. No, not the day. The new dog food company that makes air-dried dog food from a short list of human-grade ingredients. It's healthy, with beef, chicken, and digestive aids like pumpkin and ginger. It's convenient. Unlike other fresh dog foods, it's zero prep, zero mess, and zero stress. Sundays is shelf stable and ships right to your door. And it's affordable, costing 40% less than other healthy dog food brands because they don't waste money shipping frozen packages. We've got a special offer for our dog-loving Holy Posters. Get 35% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/holypost or use the code HOLYPOST at checkout. That's sundaysfordogs.com/holypost. Upgrade your pup to Sundays and feel good about the food you feed your dog. And thanks to Sundays for sponsoring this episode. The Holy Post is sponsored by Blueland. You know those little detergent pods you throw in your dishwasher? Did you know they're wrapped in plastic? Yep, that film around the pods is plastic. And guess where it ends up? In our rivers, oceans, soil, and in us! Blueland is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet. Blueland dishwasher tablets are proven to perform and contain no plastic. Even the packaging is compostable. Get even more savings by buying refills in bulk or setting up a subscription. And to celebrate Earth Month and Blueland's 5th anniversary, Blueland brought back all the fan-favorite hand soap scents from the past 5 years into one best-smelling limited edition collection. Pretty earthy, lily mint, honeysuckle dew, strawberry rhubarb, jasmine moss. Take your pick and say goodbye to single-use plastic. Blueland has a special offer for listeners. Right now, get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/holypost. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/holypost for 15% off. That's blueland.com/holypost to get 15% off. Esau hasn't been here for a while. He already voted against News of the Butt. So I had 10 great stories lined up. I'm not going to do them now because Esau's new and he's probably still jet lagged from getting back from, I don't know how long he's been back, but anyway, let's assume it was last night. He got back from England, so he's jet lagged and he's sick too. He's under the weather. So
I saw the vote that they did about whether or not to keep it. And I've never had less faith in democracy than I did.
Yeah. Oh, no. You have to give the people what they want. But we're not giving it to them today. Instead, we're doing, this was another recurring thing that I haven't done for a while. What could possibly go wrong? It's time for another installment of What Could Possibly Go Wrong. Scientists connect 16 mini brains made of human tissue to create a living computer.
No.
Would you like to hear more?
No.
I do. I want to hear what goes wrong.
Yeah. Esau wants to. Well, we don't know what goes wrong yet. We'll report on that in a year when we're in our bunkers hiding from the mini brains. Switzerland-based startup Final Spark. Okay, if that's the name of your startup, Final Spark, that's a little apocalyptic right there. No. That's concerning. Switzerland-based startup, and I bet they're under a mountain in Switzerland. I bet they're like in a James Bond villain location. Switzerland-based startup Final Spark claims to have built a unique computer processor made from 16 mini brains made from human brain tissue. And they are positioning this living computer as an alternative to silicon-based computing. Isn't that exciting? We don't need to make digital processors anymore. We can make human brain processors, which I believe...
Why do we want to do that? Or do we have a lack of the materials?
Well, Caitlin, obviously you don't know much about technology, so let me explain.
I don't.
One of the biggest advantages of biological computing, says the supervillains in the mountain in Switzerland, is that neurons compute information with much less energy than digital computers. It is estimated that living neurons can use over 1 million times less energy than the current digital processors we use. See, it's good for the environment to have mini human brains doing our thinking for us.
I have like so many follow-up questions. The first one is, where did they get the brain? Because I feel like I need all my brain.
Yeah.
Like I don't have I don't need this piece of my brain. I'm going to give it to people. So if you took someone's brain, that's super evil. Second of all, I know movies aren't reality, but like it's never ended well in any work of fiction where it started off by saying, let's make a human computer hybrid to do work for us, but we have a bunch of safeguards in place that would never go wrong. It always goes wrong.
Yeah.
So where'd the brains come from?
But that's just in movies and fiction, because in the real world, things only go the way we plan them. I don't know if you've experienced. Yes, things always go the way you plan them.
Where did they get the brains from?
I'm about to explain that, Esau Macaulay.
Oh, sorry,
fresh
I'm
back
excited.
From Oxford. The startup takes brain organoids. Do you know what an organoid is? It's a mini organ. It's a mini version of an organ that is
How
grown.
Is it mini?
It's grown. It's tiny. I'm holding up. See what I'm holding up? Like teeny tiny. You could like make a liver organoid would be liver tissue that you have grown from stem cells. So this
Oh.
startup takes brain organoids, small samples of human brain tissue derived from neural stem cells, and places them in a special environment. I'm using air quotes because we all know what that looks like in an evil genius's lab. The special, it's a glass jar that's bubbling and glowing. Put them in a special environment that keeps these organoids alive. And the organoids say, against our will, because that's how the movie goes next. Then they hook up these mini brains to specialized electrodes to perform computer processing and digital analog conversions to transform neural activity into digital information.
What country is this in?
Switzerland.
Huh.
They try to stay neutral, but they've really gone out on a limb this time.
I mean, that's probably, a lot of things that they do now on television and the movies, they try to make sure the villain is in this nondescript place that doesn't mess up any of the market. So if you would have an evil villain for Switzerland, I don't think Switzerland is a huge movie market.
No, it's a very small market. And I think among the peoples you are allowed to offend, the Swiss are very near the top of the list.
Yeah.
I feel like we're going to get a lot of Swiss emails right now from our.
You're going to discover who listens, who is Swiss. Yeah.
They should
so
put
they're
it. What are
they're
they
thinking? They could use biological computers to assist with AI processing. Because
that's what's confusing to me about this. On one hand, we're taking things that human brains used to do and having computers do it, and then here on the other hand, we're having things computers used to do, having human brains do that.
Yeah. See, here's my question: did the guy who wanted to make a computational device out of human brain tissue consider the fact that he has one of those in his head that's already up and running, and he could just work on those problems with his own biological computer that he was given by God?
It's like how everything comes back full circle, like advance. Now we're all the way back to maybe human brains. Yeah. Maybe we just care about human brains.
Yeah, we just don't like the people that they come inside. So if we can eliminate the people, then we get all matrixy. Esau, last comment. Sermon illustration. Got anything?
I'm kind of afraid of the human brain because I think that it could probably read the whole internet. So I'm thinking it's listening to us right now. And if evil brain takes over the world, can I have a good job? I don't want a hard job under our evil brain overlord. So
what are the good jobs? Because I have no idea. The number one job is harvesting more human brain tissue for conversion.
I don't want to do that job.
Yeah.
I don't want to clean up the messy brains either. Never mind. I'm joining the resistance.
You can be the harvestor or the harvestee. It's up to you. Okay, that's enough of that. We talked about last week the SBC was going to vote on the law amendment. Did you follow this at all, Esau, from your perch in Oxford, where you were wearing those fancy robes and saying Expellius Formosus all the time?
I took a break from wizarding to look a little bit into what the Southern Baptists are doing. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm vaguely aware.
So if you haven't followed it, we were saying by the time last week's episode comes out, we could know whether the law amendment passed. If you didn't listen to last week's episode, the law amendment was an amendment that has nothing to do with the law. It was proposed by a pastor named Mike Law to amend the Southern Baptist Constitution to officially forbid women from carrying the title pastor. The title. What? Caitlin, you're looking at
that's
me.
The important
You're looking at
part.
me funny.
Yeah. You could already, I feel like we might have not been super clear on this last week, that it is already true without the law amendment, and this happened at the convention, that the SBC can kick a church out for having a woman who is in a pastoral role, especially a senior pastor role. This was tightening that a little bit to say, even if she's over children, and we all agree that's okay, just calling her pastor instead of director is unacceptable.
Right. Even if she's only pastoring women, she cannot be called pastor.
Even women, even those women.
Even women. I'm not going to say anything else about that because I think I'm already in trouble. And Esau is just being quiet and letting me get myself in trouble.
You know, I'm letting you cook. I mean, I'm letting you having a moment. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Esau, will you at least tell me when I'm done?
No,
Stick
I mean,
a fork
I
in him.
was talking
He's
about
done.
midway through, but you kept going. No, I saw it failed like 61% instead of 65%.
Yeah, it was close.
Is that correct?
It needed 66%. It needed a 2/3 majority, and it got 61%. So it was. If you were against it, it was frighteningly close. If you were for it, it was frustratingly close to having passed.
Yeah.
So people are either frightened or frustrated right now.
I was actually, I asked a question on the internet, which is always a good thing to do. And people were actually nice to me, which is rare. So I asked the question because the law amendment deals with elders and pastors, but
Yes.
the actual Baptist faith and message allows for women deacons. So I asked the question, well, can a woman be a deacon? And they said yes. I said, well, in the Anglican tradition and in the Catholic tradition and the Orthodox tradition, women deacons can preach on Sundays. And probably the most famous deacon in the Bible is Stephen, who is known for his sermon, like one of the best sermons. And so I've always thought some of this doesn't actually make sense as far as the word pastor versus some of the functions that have historically been attached to the diaconate. Because there isn't a form of the diaconate in any other tradition that I can think of. Well, I shouldn't say that. The major liturgical traditions, the deacon is a preaching role alongside a serving role. And so you can be a deacon in Baptist polity. Deacons historically have preached in the context of worship, but you can't be a pastor. So there is some sense in which this is a little bit confusing to me.
So if you have access to the New Yorker, they wrote a quite extensive piece on all the goings on at the SBC convention over this issue. The subtitle is "A Proposal to Ban Southern Baptist Women from Serving as Pastors Failed a 2/3 Majority Vote, Signaling," and this is what I want to ask you guys. Do you think this is what it signaled? Signaling that the far right has not yet consolidated its control of the church. And by that, I don't know if they mean the SBC or literally the entire global church. I'm a little confused about the New Yorker's positioning of the story.
I mean, I saw that article. I think that the Southern Baptists are pretty conservative in general. And I think that eliminating the word pastor from its use is kind of an extreme position. And so I guess they're right that the most extreme of the extremes have been told no. But I don't think it means that the Southern Baptist Convention is not a relatively traditional denomination. And I also saw that in that same article, the person mentioned that the vast majority of like churches in the United States don't have female clergy. And I
evangelical,
don't know
they said.
I don't know if that's actually true.
I don't know. I don't think that's true either. Yeah.
I think that what we tend to do is we tend to think of Reformed equals evangelicals. But if you have the Pentecostals, the Holiness tradition, the Methodists, the historic Black denominations, the Anglicans, as a matter of fact, here
we've decided they're not evangelical.
We're kicked out. But here's another one. Even
do you know
the
why,
Orthodox
Esau?
Church,
Do you know why, Esau? Because they have women pastors. Because they have women pastors. So evangelical churches don't have women pastors because if you have a women pastor, you're not an evangelical church. Ta-da! My logic is rock solid.
So I would wonder if that was actually true. Now, if you get down to practice, I know I have a lot of female clergy friends who says that even when a denomination has something on paper, what actually happens in practice is different. But I'll be surprised if you just did a raw count of evangelical denominations and you included the non-reformed people like the Methodist and the Wesleyan tradition and the Pentecostals and the Black church and I don't have a good understanding of how egalitarian the kind of Hispanic churches tend to be. I have no idea, but they're influenced by Pentecostalism, which tends to have a strong female presence. But I actually think it's the opposite. I think it's actually bigger on the other side.
Okay. So and this is kind of interesting in this article. They go through the history of how we got here. They interview Rick Warren. They interview Kristen Kobes-Demay. So they interview a bunch of people and talk about Rick Warren, who during the COVID pandemic, because he was strongly complementarian and believed only men could be pastors. And during the COVID pandemic, apparently he found himself with extra time on his hands and he started reading the accounts of women in the early church and noticing how much they were doing that we say women have never been allowed to do. And the more he looked into it, the more his position started to change, so that in 2021, he ordained 3 women as pastors at Saddleback. And the Saddleback was at that time an SBC church, probably the best known. And then in 2022, commissioned a 4th woman to succeed him in leading Saddleback alongside her husband. And that created a stir in the SBC. Which had started back in 2020 when a splinter organization, which I've bumped into online myself, calling itself the Conservative Baptist Network, decided that the Southern Baptists were starting to drift liberal yet again. And if you know the history of the Southern Baptists, there was the conservative resurgence that happened in the early 80s that drove all the liberals and moderates out of the convention. And so someone was quoted saying that these guys kind of feel they're too young to have gone through that last war, and so they want to have a war to do for themselves. So it's a radically conservative group that's trying to claim the entire Southern Baptist Convention is adrift once again, and we must return it to the Bible. And the biggest issue is women with the title pastor.
I think 2 things could be true at the same time. One, this is probably the most important. It's simply demonstrably false that every single denomination that ordains women is or becomes liberal. It's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, Pentecostalism has been egalitarian from its founding, and it's still relatively traditional. If you look at the global church, there are churches in Kenya and Uganda, and other places that ordain women that are really traditional. Even the Orthodox Church, I mean, like the oldest denomination alongside the Catholics, they recently started ordaining female deacons, and it happened I think in Zimbabwe, which is also relatively traditional. And so the idea that if you ordain women, your denomination will start to change other key theological concepts isn't necessarily true. It is also true that does happen sometimes. But I think the difference between correlation and causation is what tends to happen. The idea that every single denomination that ordains women is or becomes liberal, that isn't necessarily the case. It's really the issue of why denominations ordain women. The denominations read the scriptures as I do and see in them a strong account for why women ought to be ordained. I don't think one necessarily leads to the other. And so I do think that the fear that surrounds female clergy is A, it's unbiblical, like that kind of fear. And B, I think it's not historically grounded, that it's always the case. And so I would love for people to present evidence that this is the case, that spans denominations and traditions in the globe, and actually made that argument instead of just asserting what we all think to know is true. If you ordain women, you automatically lose your theological bearings. I just don't think that's true.
Okay. Caitlin, tell him how he's wrong.
No, I think he's right. I mean, this is basically what I said last week was, how did you get there? That tells me if this is the slippery slope to liberalism, is if you just kind of said, well, the times have changed, the Bible's anachronistic. That's a very different approach to getting to ordaining women than saying, I've studied really faithfully, I've looked at history, and I've come to the conclusion that women share in this vocation with men, and that we need men and women in the church, in leadership in the church. The other thing that's like so frustrating to me about this, that I didn't think about last week, but hearing Esau describe it that way, it reminds me of being in seminary when this was a big fight in my seminary, and it was settled in a very complementarian way. The doctrinal statement was changed the year that I graduated to make very clear there's really little openness for egalitarian perspectives here. And what was so frustrating for so many of the women that were students with me was that we were like, we don't want to be sacrificed on the altar of your culture war. Like, this is not a hypothetical, theological, abstract idea for us. This is a group of women who, especially the seminary I went to, if you showed up there to be trained to serve in the church, this was not like on a whim. This was not just like, it sounds fun. This wasn't just like feminist angst. This was, I've been called by God. I am trying to be faithful. And I'm not trying to be either the figurehead that maybe a more progressive end wants to make me, of like, I am the symbol of your feminist movement, or the cause of the decline of the church from the other end of the spectrum. I just want to be like you, someone who is responding as faithfully as I can to God's call, who's trying to discern in scripture what's right for me and what I think is right for the church. And so I've been frustrated in some of the conversations online about the SBC, especially by people who actually aren't in the SBC, who are treating this like just another thing to fight on the internet about, when I know women in SBC churches, some of whom have no desire to preach or to pastor. They're just trying to serve faithfully in their church, and just their existence at the convention, their existence in some kind of service in their church, becomes a symbol to people of this culture war fight that we're having. And it is important. I understand why it matters to people, how we live together in the church, who can lead us. Like, all of those things are big, important questions. I understand why they feel weighty. I just am frustrated by the way that women who are just trying to serve by both ends of the spectrum get held up as symbols instead of treated as people. And I loved in the New Yorker, there were things I didn't love. There were a few times, as Esau said, where I was like, some more religion background could be helpful here. I don't know that all of this is totally true. But what I loved was the story of the Southern Baptist woman pastor who was kicked out, and kind of because of the attention that Saddleback was getting, they discovered this church where she was the leader. I just loved this story of this woman who was like, I'm really conservative theologically. I'm not trying to be a symbol of women taking over the church. I'm just trying to pastor my church. And that is the majority of women that I know. And the majority of women that I know also, like, in some sense, wanted it not to be true. Like, I know a bunch of us who went to scripture and they were like, it would take a burden off of me if I could come here and say, oh, sorry, I can't preach. Like, this call I'm feeling must be wrong. But that's not what they found. And I just wish people who even came to a very complementarian perspective, which I said last week, I can respect you if you have really thought through this and come to that perspective. But can you respect women who are like, I've studied and I've tried to discern God's calling, and this is where I am, and we can disagree, but don't treat me like a threat to the church.
I think that one of the things that happens, and this is speaking as an African American, I know this is not the exact same thing, is that when you become the center of debate, you also become the danger. And you see how, rather than simply making a theological argument, which often happens, and I want to be clear, you can be theologically opposed to the ordination of women, and I don't want to say that every single person who does that is misogynistic. I don't want to make that argument. But I want to say there's a lot of misogyny that exists in those circles. And because that misogyny adds to the argument, and sometimes it just becomes hard for women to be in those spaces. In other words, if you can't win the argument by exegesis, sometimes women feel like it's just uncomfortable for me to be in these spaces. And so the ways in which this issue is discussed and framed, I think, is important. In the same way that when we're having our periodic racial issues, it becomes really hard to be Black or an ethnic minority in those spaces. And I don't think that people often understand what it means to be in your person, seen as the danger, right? The women are the danger.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So just being a woman, the first thing that you have to do is perform your orthodoxy. As a Black person, people just assume I'm a liberal, right? If I talk about race, of course I'm a liberal. So the first thing I have to do is perform my orthodoxy so the people will listen to me. And I think that idea, there's this thing that you see, I think you may have run across this. What's it called? Like netter, no enemies to the right. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And the idea is that you can, like, there is no too far right. There's only danger to the left. And I want to say maybe it's possible that in our pursuit of with their pursuit of what they think is biblical, they've aligned themselves with people who are ultimately not good for the body of Christ either. In other words, you can slide down the slope to the right. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you just look around, some of the people who you see urging this ultra complementarianism are just, some of it is sexist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But Esau, when you slide down the slippery slope to the right, at the bottom, you find Jesus.
Cookies? Oh, I thought you said cookies.
And when you slide down the slippery slope to the left, at the bottom, you find Satan. So Which way do you want to slide? Okay, I'm not going to let you talk because I have to say something. The woman Caitlin was referring to is Linda Barnes Popham, who is the 68-year-old
Yes.
pastor of Fern Creek Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. She was interviewed for this article, and she said when she went to Southern Seminary, one of the Southern Baptist seminaries in the 1980s, women were allowed to study preaching. Women won the preaching award, she told me. All of her professors affirmed women in ministry. And so in 85, when she graduated, that was still the case, but now conservatives were starting to reassert their control and kicking out whoever they thought was too moderate on this issue. So she became a pastor in an era when women were being trained to be preachers in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't very long ago. Okay, speaking of the sliding to the left or the sliding to the right.
Slide to the left, slide to the right.
Have you heard of the upcoming book called Shepherds for Sale? You heard of that book?
Yeah.
Shepherds for Sale, Esau? Esau ringing any bells?
Vaguely. Keep talking.
It comes out next month in July. It is written by Megan Basham, a journalist with the Daily Wire, whom I have clashed with numerous times on Twitter. We're frenemies. We bop each other on Twitter fairly often and just have little conversations. Even in the direct messages, we talk sometimes in the direct messages. So anyway, the book is called Shepherds for Sale: How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda. And then the premise is, for years, the American church has been overrun with leaders who are selling out their ministries to the highest bidders, giving wolves access to their sheep in exchange for elite respectability. And it's heavily researched. She's a real trained journalist, and she says she names names and brings receipts. And what she's fundamentally talking about is cases like David French and Russell Moore's after party curriculum, which got some of its funding from a secular foundation that also funds some things that we don't like Planned Parenthood and other things. And so she goes through lists of particularly in the SBC, the ERLC, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission in the SBC is a particular target because they did, for example, this is another one of her heavily researched attacks. They did the MLK 50 conference that was to try to get Southern Baptists to kind of relook at the legacy of Martin Luther King, and it was partially funded by a secular foundation. So she has found that secular foundations are trying to influence conservative Christianity by offering grants to conservative Christians, which therefore means something bad is happening and that she must stop it. And it's coming out next month, and her talk at the Southern Baptist Convention was better attended than the talk with Mike Pence. So like almost 1,000 people came to hear her talk about this juicy topic. So what I have clashed with her about, because I kept asking her, what are the examples of bad things happening? And she's like, well, wait for the book or watch my talk. So I watched a couple of her talks. I listened to a couple of her podcast interviews. Fundamentally, what she's intimating is that the Southern Baptist Convention is departing from biblical Christianity. What she gives examples of are institutions and people in the Southern Baptist Convention who are not adhering to Republican orthodoxy as conceived today. So another example was a Southern Baptist seminary that has hosted speakers to talk about climate change in a way that sounds like they believe it's a big deal. This is an example of people infiltrating the church to try to turn it leftist.
I can't speak to a book that I haven't read that isn't out yet.
Sure you can.
But I will say,
go do it.
But I would say, I do think that we are always in danger as Christians of treating our political views as orthodoxy and conflating political opinions with theological opinions. And people, and I wish that we could disagree without de-Christianizing one another. So I think the climate change is real, basically because I think the cause and effect, right? If you destroy the environment, the idea that there will be consequences of that destruction seems to me to be logical and profoundly biblical as far as how the world might work. And so the idea that if I believe that we should care for the environment as stewards of creation, that I somehow take the Bible less seriously, or that I'm under the thumb of some government-funded or secular agency, to me is difficult to maintain. But it's also true that, like, in every circle, you get political, cultural, and economic benefits from touting your side. So if you are the person on the right who says all of this stuff on the left is bunk, anyone who doesn't do it anyone who supports it is not a Christian. There's a lot of money, there's touring, there's finance, there's book sales for you there. And there's also an entire separate industry that's constructed to fund and pay for and reward Christians who give the other side. And I do think that we have to understand that everybody has an economic benefit. And so the idea that one of us is motivated by money and the other one is motivated by pure love for the gospel is slightly cynical. And I do think that we should recognize that all of us have trouble breaking away from our tribe's political and cultural orthodoxy.
Yeah. So Esau, which side have you sold out to?
I mean, nobody offered me enough money. I got 4 kids too. I'm not saying I'm for sale. I'm saying make me an offer.
Caitlin, thoughts? Hey, you do a lot of thinking about politics and Christianity. So what do you think when you hear someone trying to build a case that leftist politics are trying to pull the church away from the truth?
I mean, to what Esau just said, no one has totally pure motives, but also ascribing entirely impure motives to people who disagree with you is not a faithful approach, nor is it a healthy way to have a conversation. I think what's really hard is we learn in the political culture that we swim in that most people who disagree with me are either evil or stupid, because it's clear and obvious what we should do, right? So if you disagree with me, you must be either evil or stupid. And I imagine most people listening, some of the things we're talking about are not real temptations for them. Like, I don't think most people who listen to the HOLYPOST are at risk of believing that leftism is infiltrating the Southern Baptist Convention and making them unfaithful to the gospel. But this tendency to view the people that we disagree with as evil or stupid is a problem, a temptation for all of us. And it's something, even in just the last few days, while watching some things in the Southern Baptist Convention unfold, I have had to check for myself of if I start seeing someone and what they post about women or what they post about the Nicene Creed, and my impulse is to say, well, you're just an idiot. I have to check that too. Like, I'm not exempt from that because, we on this podcast are right about things and compared to the SBC. Like, that is a really pernicious temptation. And it's not just unchristian, which it is. It's not acting like Jesus towards our neighbors. It also isn't productive. Like, if I want to have dialogue in my church, for example, the woman that you were just referencing in the article, the Southern Baptist pastor, who's not a Southern Baptist pastor anymore, I just loved, as a side note, there's a whole love story in this article. Like, there was a man at her church who did not think she should be the pastor. They fell in love, got married. I want to sit and talk to them. That's
and
just beautiful.
He's 80. He's 80 and he drives around with her on visitation and waits in the car.
Waits for her to do the things she's doing.
You're never too old to find love.
I just think that's so sweet. But also, I have seen in churches people who deeply disagree about some of the things we're talking about, whether it is what restrictions there might be on women's leadership in the church, whether it is political questions, whether it's not even just a specific policy, it's just like, what emphasis should our church have when it comes to evangelism and social justice? And I've seen people with deep disagreements come to some place of common understanding, collaborate on things. But it doesn't happen if you have been formed by your social media consumption, by the political culture around us, to think that anyone who disagrees with you is evil or stupid. And it's a really important Christian practice, I think, to learn to have this impulse to check yourself when you do that, because we never become fully exempt from it, but we can become the kind of people who learn to feel that impulse in ourselves and say, no, I want to understand you better. Even if I think you're grievously wrong. Like, you could be really
Mhm.
deeply wrong. This isn't a way to say, well, we all have kind of equally valid opinions, but just to say, if I want to change your mind, if I want my church or my denomination or my community to be a better place, I don't get there by just writing you off. I get there by saying, I want to understand. There are people that you will cease to be able to have conversations with, but as long as you are still in relationship with them, learning to have that impulse of asking questions and being curious about how they got there is a better way forward.
And I would say that the people who you see, the people representing any tradition aren't the meanest people who you see on the internet. There's more to the Southern Baptist Convention than the meanest Southern Baptist you can find online.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've learned about I work here, I teach at Wheaton College. And we have we have women who are on both sides of the egalitarian complementarian divide. And the women who are complementarian aren't just because they are like they would say, I came to these convictions honestly.
Yeah, they're not subjugated.
Yeah, I want to say, you know what, I respect both of these hard-won moments of discernment. And some of the women who are trying to work within Southern Baptist Convention are saying, yes, I'm complementarian. I just don't think that this particular manifestation complementarianism is the healthiest. And so I've tried to say, well, how can I do the best that I can to not see the people I disagree with in this most difficult manifestation, and to try to respect the people. I mean, it's very easy to sit from the sidelines and dunk on the people who we think are, as Caitlin said, dumb. It's harder to say, what about all the people who are in there who are continuing to engage these institutions in hopes of reform? Like, we have a strong culture of cynical condemnation, and not as much, I don't want to say cynical, condemnation arising out of deep hurt. And it's easier not to hope.
Yeah.
And I think and I understand that because people have been wounded by the church. But I also want to say there are people who are continuing to engage these institutions and trying to make them better. And they deserve our respect too.
Yeah. I want to stop looking inside the church and look outside the church just for a little bit before we wrap up to something that's going on elsewhere. Not everything that's happening in the world is happening inside the church. Modern death cafes are very much alive in Los Angeles. This is from the Los Angeles Times. You might say, what on earth is a modern death cafe? That sounds terrifying. People go there to die or kill people? No, it's not any of those things. It is a movement where people have tea and cake and talk about death because they're wrestling with their own mortality. They've just lost a loved one. So they go to bookstores, they go to libraries, they have little meetings, they eat cake and sip tea, and they have honest and open conversations around death. Very often they initiate these meetings by having the group go around the circle and say, what brought you here to the death cafe? And that's a jumping off point for everyone to say, I'm dealing with aging parents, or I lost a loved one during the pandemic, or I'm going through a life transition and I'm wrestling with anxiety about my own mortality. And here's what struck me, because this reporter for the LA Times interviewed 4 or 5 different hosts of death cafes around the greater Los Angeles area. And their conclusion was, no matter the reason, everyone seems to be seeking some form of comfort, connection, and community. And I'm just thinking, why isn't the church providing that for these people? Why are we arguing about a 68-year-old woman who's doing a wonderful job ministering to Lexington, Kentucky, and whether she should have the title pastor, when we've got so many people wandering around saying, is there anyone I can talk to about death? Okay, that's all I got to say. I just feel like we could be helping people more. Maybe. Esau, yes, no? Do I have a point?
No, I was actually thinking that I don't think we talk about death enough, even in the church.
Right.
There's this quote that I use. I used it I did the commencement at Seattle Pacific University a week ago.
Did you talk about death? I'm hoping you talked about death. That's a great commencement topic.
Yes, I did. And I quoted Tolstoy, and he says, "Is there anything in my life that any meaning in my life that my inevitable death does not ultimately destroy?"
Mm.
And there's a certain kind of nihilism where you kind of go, "What's the point of all of this?"
Mm-hmm.
And I do think living in the reality that we're all going to die. They tell these stories about the saints, some of the saints. This might be too dark for you, Phil, and I don't think my wife will let me do this either. But they would sleep in the room with a casket.
Yeah.
So they would wake up every morning and look at the casket and go, "You're going to be there one day." And I wonder if we took seriously the idea that death awaits us, that it would inform the kind of decisions that we make. And I do think that sometimes, because of our health culture, which is fine, you should be healthy, you should live as long as you possibly can. But I sometimes, maybe I'm just morbid, I just walk, when you're young, you don't feel like you can die. You feel like I'll live forever. I walk around the streets sometimes and I see young people. It's like, you're going to get old. I don't say it to them. I just think it. And I just like, I don't know. There's something about, we pretend like death is not a reality that's universal to human experience. And I think we should talk about it more as a church. Besides the fact of having people as a group to talk about it, I just think in general it should be more of a conversation besides just going to heaven when you die, facing the reality about death.
Caitlin, you want to wrap us up and send us home?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking when you sent this article, yes, when you sent this article, I was thinking about how this last week on Curiously Caitlin, we talked about the question, where did Jesus go when he died on the cross? And I linked in the notes one of my favorite Last Judgment mosaics from this little church in Italy that is just beautiful. And I could talk about it for a long time. And it has this beautiful harrowing of hell with like all of my favorite imagery involved in it. But under that, it has a traditional Last Judgment. It's like all the layers of hell, all the judgment, all the skulls and the, crushed people. And I remember feeling kind of nervous linking it. Like, I'm talking about this one image, but people are going to click on it and see the skulls and the death and all the scary stuff. And then I thought, like, actually, how beautiful would it be after we just finished this episode where Matthew Emerson said, why this doctrine matters so much is because when we are facing death or our loved ones are facing death, we don't just know they'll hypothetically, in some kind of vague sense, be with God. We actually can say Jesus experienced death to that degree, experienced physical suffering on the cross, and then experienced what it is for your soul and your body to be separated in death. And the experience of that is something that Jesus shares. He has walked through the valley of the shadow of death. And then I thought, how beautiful would it be for someone to hear that word of comfort, and then see this image and go, Christians don't have to be afraid of this. We can, like Esau said, we can talk about it. We can look it straight in its face, and it doesn't have to have power over us because Jesus has triumphed over it. But sometimes we act like he hasn't. Like, we do have to really tiptoe around it. Like, we can't say things explicitly. I remember in my Sunday school class once, a little kid saying that their grandfather had passed away, and someone else said, "What does that mean?" And a little kid goes, "It means he died." And one of the other teachers was like so uncomfortable with that. Like, "Oh gosh, I can't believe we just said that with these little kids." It's like, no, not only do they know that people die from a very young age, this is something that they experience, they hear talked about, especially in past cultures where it was just so much more in your face. Like, you know that people are going to die. What a beautiful opportunity for us to turn around in the Sunday school class and go, you know why we come to church every Sunday? It's not just so that we can do some nice things and hang out with some people that are similar to us. It's because Jesus has conquered death, and we are awaiting the final conquering of all of sin and death. And we get to do that together and celebrate that together.
And I think this article also does touch on the fact that we are a profoundly lonely culture. That we're so good at presenting the best version of ourselves on the different social media platforms in our life. But the amount of people who we can talk about things that are very deep and sensitive to us, there's just not a lot of spaces for that. And the idea that the church is always supposed to be a community that met in each other's homes, that prayed together, that ate together. And so I do think that sometimes we can get so programmatic on some of the things that we do on Sundays, which are important, do we lose the fact that, and this isn't just for like single people need friends, married people need friends. And so the idea that the young and the old, the idea of a multi-generational, multicultural community that shares life together, even the deepest, most intimate parts of life. Like, I'm afraid of dying,
Mm-hmm.
or my mom is dying, and I don't know how to process this. I do think that you're correct that the church could sometimes get about the business of being the church instead of just fighting for ourselves. I think it was her last name is Bird. What's her first name? Bird.
Oh,
Amy Bird?
Burr?
Amy Bird. Yes, I think.
Yeah.
I think she said. I think it was her. If it's not, I apologize. She said, if the people looked on the internet at what Christians were talking about over the last week, because of all of the stuff that's been going on with the different meetings, how might they perceive of Christianity? And obviously, Christianity isn't defined by our tweets, but the fact that we sometimes spend more time fighting with one another than encouraging or helping or manifesting charity or being a place of welcome, I do think speaks to some of the dysfunction that we currently have, at least in public expressions of Christianity, on the place where people gather now, which is part the social media.
Right. Esau McCauley.
Yes.
I told Caitlin she could have the last word.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
And then she already had the last word, and then you talked. So that's going on your permanent record.
I apologize.
What you said was wonderful. What you said was very nice. I'm just saying.
I'm sick.
That you're sick. Okay.
Phil,
Yes,
I'm always in favor of a intergenerational church plug. So thank you, Esau, for that.
Okay. Sure. Okay. We'll let
you just had the last word. Say thank you again, and then we can go.
We'll let it slide this time. I just hope that we, and I include myself in this, can spend a little less time wondering how our church or our denomination is lining up with our political preferences, and a little more time remembering there are people wandering around out there that are terrified of death. And
you literally just stole Caitlin's last word after rebuking me for doing that.
Esau,
you literally.
I'm the host. I have to wrap it up.
Sorry.
I'm the host.
I apologize.
Esau. Boy, man, that's another. I'm going to put that's going in your file too. Thanks everybody for coming along this week. It's great to have you here with us. Thanks for your support. Check out what's going on at HOLYPOST Plus, and got a great guest coming up, so don't go away. We'll see you next time. Bye.
This episode is being sponsored by BetterHelp. When I was a younger man, I did not know how to handle stress. I tended to bottle it up, and it came out in really negative ways. For me, it manifested with physical heart palpitations. But through that experience, I learned healthy and unhealthy ways of dealing with stress. And one of the better ways is by talking to someone you can trust. Therapy is a safe place to get things off your chest and to figure out a healthy way of dealing with your stress. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So learn how to get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/holypost today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/holypost. My guest today is no stranger to the Holy Post. Ryan Burge is one of our faithful and brilliant Holy Post pundits. You've probably seen him on ABC News, CNN, PBS NewsHour, or quoted in basically every online and print news outlet in existence. He's just the best analyst of data about faith, religion, and politics in the country. Ryan is a Baptist pastor and an associate professor of political science at Eastern Illinois University. His Substack is a must-read for anyone who cares about trends in faith and culture and politics. It's called graphsaboutreligion.com. Here's my conversation with Ryan Burge. Hey, Ryan, welcome back to the Holy Post.
Thanks so much for having me, Sky.
Of course, you are a pundit. You are welcome here anytime. You are putting out excellent content on graphsaboutreligion.com. Oh, and you got your Holy Post pundit Tumblr.
You better believe it.
Yeah. I hope you show that off in all the other networks and cable news shows you're doing.
Yeah. Hey, PBS, I'm a Holy Post pundit. Check this out. They're like, what is that?
Oh, yeah. We're big with the PBS demographic. So that's
a lot of overlap.
Helpful. Lots of overlap.
Yeah.
Okay. You are always putting out fantastic articles and analysis on new data. You're writing about the Southern Baptist Convention and the stuff that they're up to. Before we get into some of that, though, I want to go back to something you wrote about a month ago. you wrote this great piece, and we'll link to it in the show notes for those who want to read it themselves, called "What Does It Mean to Be Religious?" And there's so much data thrown out there in the media about the nuns and declining religious attendance. And then you see data about what people actually believe or don't believe. And it all gets muddled. And the narrative that most people are hearing is religion is dying. People aren't religious anymore. It's all going down the tank. No one's attending church, blah, blah, blah. And you bring a level of complication and nuance to the question that I deeply appreciate. So talk about the three approaches to defining religion as a sociologist and how that impacts the way we think about the question.
Yeah. So like when someone says I'm religious, the social science me goes, what do you mean by that? Like, what is the first thing that comes in I think a lot of people think belief is like the number one thing. Like I'm religious because I believe in Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or, whatever. But like, that's just one of the three. By the way, this was invented by a team of like 4 evangelical social scientists back in the day, which is such a evangelical thing. Like my sermon has 3 points. They all start with B. And like, this is the same deal. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like behavior, belief, and belonging. And so like belief is one of the 3 Bs, which is like, it's actually probably the hardest to measure on surveys because not, like belief for every religion is a little bit different. So you can't like a catch-all question that will mean the same for evangelicals as it will for like Buddhists or Hindu people. You know what I mean? So that's the hard part. So like questions like, how do you believe about the Bible? Literally true, inspired but not literal, book of fables. What do you believe in heaven, hell, angels, demons? How certain are you of your beliefs is always kind of a fun question. You know what I mean? Like, how much do you doubt your beliefs? We ask a question of the GSS asks a cool God question. Like, what do you believe about God? And gives you like 6 options from like, I don't believe in God to I believe in God without any doubts. And so that's kind of a fun way to do belief. Then there's behavior, which is actually probably the easiest one to measure because it's like, well, how often do you go to religious services? That's usually the way it's measured. There's a prayer one that every survey has that no one ever uses because it's kind of honestly terrible. Like, because everyone just lies about that like crazy. Like, I pray every day. Sure. Yeah. It's also like, what is prayer? You know what I mean? At the end of the day.
Yeah, some people it's, oh, God, give me a good parking spot. It's really crowded at the mall today, and they consider that prayer. Or somebody said when I was a student at a public school, as long as there's calculus, there will always be prayer in school or something ridiculous like that. But,
amen. So that's like,
okay, I get why that question's not helpful.
Yeah, so like the attendance question is usually like number one. The problem with that though is there's some Eastern religions where attendance is not part of like traditional, like understanding of being religious.
Right.
So that makes that like that problem is like there's no measure that like works well across every religious experience. The third one is belonging, which I actually think as a social scientist is probably the most important because it's like, what's your present religion, if any? And then you get the whole list, like Protestant, Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Jew, atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular. And there's the category called something else at the bottom, and you check that box, and you get a little text box to write into. And if you want to go into the 7th circle of hell, it's in that text box on those surveys because people will write the most nonsensical thing. Like, I'm a Baptist. Why was that not an option? I'm like, oh my God, you don't know what the word Protestant means, dude.
Right, right.
So like to me though, here's why that's most important. Because it says like, who are my people? Like, who's my tribe? Who do I throw
identify
in
with?
Yeah.
Right.
Like in the social space, the landscape, I walk into a cafeteria and there's a Protestant table and a Catholic table and a Buddhist table and a Hindu table and an atheist table. Who do I sit with? That tells me a lot.
If you're a good Baptist, you go and you sit with the non-Christians.
Of course you would. But they'd all go sit with they wouldn't even sit with the Protestants. They sit like, where's the Reformed Evangelical Acts 29 ones? And they go sit with that group. Because that's what we've done. But like, I think that's really important because to me, there's actually, the data says this, by the way, there's a huge difference politically between a non-attending atheist and a non-attending Catholic. Like they vote completely differently because by saying you're a non-attender, but also saying you're Catholic, you're saying that like, I still feel Catholic and I still like think those are my people, even though I never go to mass. So that's why I think, this belonging measure is so important. It's kind of like a window into your psyche about how you see yourself socially that the other two don't provide.
Okay, but those of us who have been shaped and formed by a lot of American evangelicalism would say, who cares what group you identify with? And who cares whether or not you go to church on a weekly basis? What we care about is what do you actually, quote unquote, believe? What doctrines do you affirm? But you said that's the hardest one to measure.
Mm-hmm. It's actually the least predictive of like political stuff, which is what I'm a political scientist. So I'm always trying to figure out like what predicts you voting for Trump versus Biden, or voting or not, like just in general. And honestly, everything else is a proxy for that. So if you give me like I'm a weekly attending evangelical, I don't need the literalism piece, because it's almost implied by the fact that you're like a weekly attending Southern Baptist. But I just published data today. 75% of Southern Baptists are literalists today. Highest percentage it's ever been. And if you go weekly attending Southern Baptists, it's over 80%. So like at some point, that does not add a whole lot of, depth of knowledge to who you are as a respondent by adding the literalism piece to it. So you hardly ever see much published right now in social science where like the belief questions are center stage. It's almost always the belonging question or a behavior question.
Okay, so let's talk about how this is playing out in the data, especially as it relates to younger generations, because it seems like a headline every day somewhere on social media. People are talking about, Gen Z or millennials or whatever the topic is. They're not attending church like they used to, or they don't believe in God like they used to, or they feel spiritually homeless, or whatever it might be. Where in that framework of belonging, belief, behavior, where are we actually seeing the shifts happen?
So the biggest change is in the behavior piece. Okay. Church, I always say, like, if you think about like how people fall away from religion, it's like they stop attending first, then they stop belonging second. So like I used to go once a month and now I go seldom or never. And then it's like, okay, I used to identify as Protestant. Now I identify as like nothing in particular. And then the last layer is the belief piece. 88% of Americans say they believe in God, at least at some level, which means they don't have an atheistic view of God or an agnostic view of God. They say they believe in like a higher power, or they believe in God with doubts or no doubts. So that's almost always the last one to go. It's the behavior piece, then the belonging piece, and then the belief piece. Most people, even if they get rid of the other two, still have the belief piece in God in America.
Right. I mean, that's been my experience. A lot of folks I know, including older generations, who have walked away from engagement with the institutional church. They're no longer behaving through church attendance. But most of the ones I know, their beliefs have not changed. In fact, some cases it's stronger than ever. But is the opposite also true? I mean, Jonathan Haidt and others have written about how people change their views on things. Is it also true that they have to feel like they belong somewhere, and then the behaviors follow that, and only after those two things are in place do the beliefs end up being changed or conforming to the community they've become a part of?
I would say 20 years ago, probably the community part would like drag you into the belief part over time, but it almost feels like with social media, like people are latching onto the belief part of, like, you even heard Richard Dawkins say like a month ago, I'm a cultural Christian now.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, by the way, before that, the precursor to that was he went on his podcast and said that there are two genders, male and female, which really made a lot of atheists mad. But I think what you're seeing now is a lot of younger people are reading about like gender identity stuff on social media and going, man, I'm more conservative on that stuff than I thought I was, like surrogacy, IVF, things like that. And now I think they're saying like, wow, I'm more culturally conservative than I thought I was. Where can I find other people that can have like a cultural conservatism like I do? Well, the answer is, Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity. But you're even seeing like growth in like Eastern Orthodox, Greek and Eastern Orthodox churches are growing, and they're largely growing. They're getting a lot more conservative, by the way. The average Orthodox Christian is like 20 points more conservative today than they were 15 years ago. And I think they're being drawn to Christianity because of the belief part now, when I don't think that was true 25, 30 years ago.
Interesting. So, you have a book coming out next year. We were talking about before we started recording. It's The Big Church Sort. Is that
The
what
Big
it's
Church
called?
Sort? That's the title. Yeah.
So some folks may be familiar with what the big sort is, but explain what you mean by the big church sort, because it sounds like that's what you're describing, where people are selecting churches based primarily on cultural and political views rather than maybe even doctrinal ones.
There's this incessant like desire to purify oneself as a religious group. It feels like it's like, no, the opposite of the big tent is what religious people are. It's like, no, you've got to pass these tests. And you're seeing this, by the way, not to point out the SBC, but it happened last week. So it's on my mind right now is like, how conservative can we get? And so now it's like, let's pass an amendment that says that women cannot be, children's pastors. You can't have the title of pastor at all. When 30 or 40 years ago, that was really not really a debate in SBC land. Like they just existed and everyone goes, it's fine. They're not preaching, so it's okay. Like there's a constant purification that goes on to kick out anyone that we can, like, it's almost like I have a really hard time talking to like the mainstream media about the Southern Baptist Convention because I'm like, oh, J.D. Greer's a moderate. No, he's not. Like in the grand scheme of things, J.D. Greer is far right of center politically, but in SBC land, he's a moderate somehow.
Right.
Like, so I think that's the problem is like this discourse has changed so much that inside these groups have become so purified. And you're seeing this in the Catholic Church too, by the way. I just got some data about, they asked priests what their how they describe their theology, liberal, moderate, or conservative. And they broke it down by a decade of ordination. It used to be you'd have like a third, and a third, a third liberal, a third conservative, a third and moderate. Now, amongst priests who have been ordained in the last 10 years, less than 5% of them describe their theology as liberal. Less than 5%.
Okay, so whether it's SBC land or the Roman Catholic Church, is part of the dynamic, you go back a generation or two, there was just a cultural expectation of belonging. Mm-hmm. to these churches. And so if you found yourself with more progressive ideas, you go, well, I have to be a Catholic. I'm going to be a progressive Catholic. Or if I'm a little progressive in some of my views, but I'm Southern Baptist, I'm going to be a progressive Southern Baptist. But today there's so much less cultural expectation of church involvement that the progressives are just opting out entirely, which leaves a stronger conservative base for all these different church traditions, whether Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Southern Baptist. And are you seeing any evidence that this purification dynamic is happening on the left, or is it only really happening on the right in churches? Are left-leaning churches kicking out people who aren't left enough?
Yeah, so the thing is, they're almost becoming numerically irrelevant. I think we've got to make that clear, right? Like the main line was 50% of America in the late 1950s, and now they're 9% of America. 1.5% of Americans are mainline Protestants under the age of 40 years old. Like there is no future for the main line. I think that's the bigger part of the book, though, right? Is like the main line politically, if you actually look at them politically, they've been one of the most heterogeneous political traditions in America. The Republicans and Democrats have always almost been 1-to-1. Actually, there are more Republicans in the main line than Democrats. It's just the problem is the leadership is incredibly liberal and tries to pull the denomination towards the left when people in the pews are like Lutherans from rural Minnesota. You know what I mean? They're not that. They're conservative culturally and stuff. But the bigger argument in the book is if you stand in the middle of the road, you get hit by cars coming both ways. I think that's what the main lines always struggle with is they're too conservative for the nuns, right? Atheists, you believe in divinity and Jesus Christ and all those things, so you can't belong with us. But you're not conservative enough for the evangelicals because you have different views of the Bible and maybe sexuality and gender identity. So you can't win for losing in a society where you're almost always, you have to be coded. Left or right? Like, what are you politically? And the main line, so numerically, they're just disappearing. So there's really nothing left in the middle of religion when by the way, the Southern Baptist Convention in the late 1980s was 41% and 41%, like Democrat and Republican. Like it was almost a 1-to-1 mix. And now it's 75-25. Like it's the if you look at numerically, you cannot say, like the golden age of American religion in my lifetime was the late 1980s. The main line was almost completely balanced politically. The evangelicals are almost balanced politically. And the Catholic Church was almost balanced politically. But that was like the intersection where the line started going the other direction. They just happened to cross in the late 1980s. And now, even amongst the left, like Richard Dawkins, says there's a man and a woman. He gets kicked out of the tribe, man. Like you've got to like agree with their orthodoxy too, or you don't belong. And they'll say, "Oh no, we have a Big Ten." I go, "Well, when the atheists get together, and they do have conventions, by the way. Like they have meetings and stuff. Who gets platformed? I guarantee you Richard Dawkins is not going to get platformed going forward because he's out of step with their orthodoxy on things like gender identity. So again, purification is not just something that happens amongst evangelicals. It's happening amongst every group in America today. And the bigger part of the book, the bigger thrust of the book is this is bad, not just bad for religion. It's bad for democracy. Like, how do we survive when we have no middle anymore? And it's just people on one side who hate the other side and people on the other side who hate the other side. And by the way, it's not just, I don't like you. It's you're evil. You have a defective worldview. Like atheists will say evangelicals are racist and xenophobic, and evangelicals say atheists are baby killers. Like, how do you get past that? Like, there's no way to compromise.
Okay, beyond getting into like the larger how does society hold together kind of apocalyptic stuff.
Yeah.
When I hear that, when I hear what you're describing and I view it through an economic lens, a market lens, I would think there's an opportunity here. When a market goes too extreme and a significant number of people no longer feel that product serves me, innovation says you step in and you create a new opportunity. There's a market there for something new. So let's play on the conservative side of the spectrum, because I think there's more people there. You're in the Southern Baptist Convention. You've been there since the 1980s. You know, you're orthodox in your theological beliefs, but you find that the political and cultural rhetoric of the SBC is just going too far. And the fact that you can't call a woman who works with kids a children's pastoring, like all this stuff, and you feel increasingly alienated from that group, where does that person go?
Sky, my church is closing down in 5 weeks now. July 21st, our last Sunday. And you know what, dude? I got no place to go. I got nothing.
Why is no one stepping into that space to say, hey, we're going to create a new network, a new group, new, because it seems like there's a lot of people in that. Like when we talk about politically, a lot of people feel very homeless when it comes to the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. But I understand why we don't have a viable third party in this country, because our political structures, the Electoral College, the gerrymandering, all these different, there's a lot against a third party becoming viable, even though there's a huge market for one. But I don't understand in the religious space why there aren't new things emerging when there's no structural reason why they can't.
Yeah. There's a great paper by Larry Einencohn, who's like this economist who wrote it's called Why Strict Churches Are Strong, which is a great paper, by the way. It's actually easy to read for like a non-academic. I read it last week for something. He basically makes the argument that like, if you're in a strict church, you can't free ride. And so free ride is this idea, like you get all the benefits of an organization with none of the costs. So like you don't volunteer, you don't tithe, you just show up and get the free meal and the free stuff for your kids and all the
this
positive.
is what a lot of the seeker-driven churches were kind of predicated on, this idea.
Yeah, like let's make it easy to go.
Right.
For Einencohn, what he says is like strict churches, like they make it hard to free ride because you got to come 3 times a week, man. You got to wear a certain kind of dress and we almost like force you to tithe a certain amount. So like it cuts out that free rider problem. Moderate churches have always struggled with the free rider problem because they're just not strict. Like by definition, you're just not that way. And I think the other thing that's really struggling with us right now is we're just resistant to organizing, to joining a group of anything. And I think that to me is the bigger headwind. Take religion out of it, like theology and desire for God and all that stuff. We just don't join stuff. So whatever organization you want to start, you're going to be starting with it, behind the 8 ball, because people aren't going to want to join. And when you add religion to the mix, because a significant number of Americans are kind of like, they're not real warm towards religion right now for all kinds of problems. The other problem is like, they're just going to label you. The evangelicals are going to label you as mush and squish and middle of the road. And that for me, like, by the way, I'm an American Baptist pastor, which we are the main line. We are the squish. I've been told many times on many different forums that I'm not a real Christian because I do not believe in all the things the Southern Baptist Convention believes in. So after a while, you get tired of hearing that. And I think like that, to me, if I could say anything to evangelicals who are listening to this is, do you think the world would be better if 30% of Americans were evangelicals and 70% were nuns, or 30% were evangelicals, 20% were mainline, and 50% were nuns? Because I think the world would be a better place from every objective metric if it was 30, 20, 50 than it was 30, 70. And the world that you're driving towards is more 30, 70 than it is 30, 20, 50 by telling people like me that I don't belong, that I'm not good enough because I don't believe everything you believe. Because I'm not completely right doesn't mean I'm wrong. There's a gradation there.
I know, and yet I have interviewed and know evangelical leaders who would argue that the 30-70 is better. That getting rid of anybody who isn't completely aligned theologically with them is better. It's purifying. What's interesting is like when I was a teenager, a college student, and a seminary student, most of that occurred in the 1990s. The overwhelming vibe from American evangelicalism, at least in the circles I was in, was growth. How do we get more people engaged? How do we welcome more spiritually curious or nominal or even non-believing people into our ministries, into our churches? How do we make as big a tent as possible and have them hear the gospel, get involved in our communities? How do we love them and serve them and maybe it's the last 10, 15 years, it feels like the drive is ironically the opposite. Is how do we get rid of people? How do we get rid of people who aren't as serious about our faith as we are? How do we get rid of people who don't hold exactly the theological tenets that I hold? How do we make sure we don't let anyone in who might contaminate our views culturally, politically, theologically? And it just is, what do you attribute that shift in posture to? Is it fear? Is it, what's driving the big sort in the church? Not just, I completely agree it's happening. We're seeing it. Yeah. Why is it happening is my question.
I think it was harder to do this 20 years ago than it is today. So I think it's almost like a structural thing where you can almost you can figure people out real quick. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, now I can go here. Back in art, you walked into a church back in the day, like let's say 25 years ago, they had no website. They had no Facebook page. You had no way to research their pastor or their theology. So you walked in and were like, okay, let's figure out what they're doing here. And, and a lot of times you sit down and go, hey, this is not so bad. It's all good. It's fine. I think right now it's so easier. And I also think part of this is also because evangelicalism become even further right over time. Now it's coded to the right. So you know what you're walking into when you walk into First Baptist Church of small town, rural Illinois. Like, you know what you're getting when you walk in there. And I think that's part of it. So I think it's also like the information environments become a lot easier to sort people out. But also it's like the churches have almost like put their stake in the ground and said, here's where we are on these issues before you walk in the door. We don't want you to like make a mistake here. You know what I mean? Like if you're not.
Yeah, but like I'm thinking of the denomination I was a part of for 20 years.
Yeah.
Conservative in its theology, conservative in a lot of its cultural stances. But if somebody walked into our church who did not hold those views, we wouldn't say you don't belong here. We would say, welcome, we're glad you're here. And we hope you engage in our community. And maybe over time you come to agree with us on more of this stuff. Maybe you don't. But ultimately, we want you to grow closer to God. That's our mission and goal. So the idea that we're going to put everything out there on the internet now and don't even bother walking through the door if you don't agree with us in advance, that's sort of the antithesis of a missional outlook, isn't it?
But I think the problem is, like, it used to be, oh, you can believe differently than us. We just want you to be part of our community because maybe we can help you and you can help us and we can build the kingdom. Now it's, no, you either get to where we're going or get off. Like Mark Driscoll said it, right? My bus has run over all these people along the way because this is my vision and mission for this church. And if you don't like it, then tough. I think that the difference that at least I think about is like leading from ahead versus leading from within. A lot of pastors want to lead from ahead, which is like, I'm like the prophet standing on the hill with my stick pointed out. We're going this way. I think good leadership is like, let's figure out what the people want and how that aligns with the vision of God for our church, and then move in a direction that's consensus-based, not authority-based. I think a lot of these churches have really, and by the way, we cannot not talk about the non-denominational shift in evangelicalism over the last 30 years. And like I tweeted about this yesterday. Like, we got to stop thinking like evangelical Southern Baptists. It is not. A larger percentage of evangelicals are non-denom now than Southern Baptists. And the problem with that is they're almost always authority-led churches.
Yes.
Because it started by that guy, and he's been there for 30 years now, and he's going to tell you where you're going to go. And the reason you follow him is because we started with 12 people, now we got 1,200. So, hey, scoreboard, buddy, I did the job. So now I can lead you going forward. And I think that's part of it too, though, is like, success teaches you nothing, Sky. It teaches you nothing. Right? Because now everyone falls in line because you can say, listen, I grew this from nothing to this. So get in line. That's what Mark Driscoll did up at Mars Hill. And I think that's the bigger problem is when we move to a different authority structure where this leader's like way out. By the way, the SBC's always been this way, but non-denoms take it to another level beyond that because there's nothing above you. If you're non-denom, like it ends with you. And so I think that's part of it too, as well as the pastor can just put his foot down and say, either you're with us or you're against us. And there's no way to resist that from the bottom up.
It just seems so unnuanced. Like when I read the Gospels, what you see in a lot of the early chapters is Jesus and or his apostles essentially saying, come and see come check this out. Come look at what's happening. Come hear what he's saying. Come and see. And lots of people end up coming and following Jesus, and they're fed when they're hungry and they're healed when they're sick and all that. But then at some point, like John chapter 6, you have Jesus turning around to the crowds and being like, okay, are you serious? Are you really wanting to follow me? Because here's the deal. And a lot of people leave. And it seems to me like in a healthy church that's reflecting the posture of Jesus, there is a strong come and see. Welcome here, wherever you are, whatever you think, whatever you believe, whatever brokenness you carry, come and see. We want you here. But then there's an understanding that, if you're going to be in a leadership role, if you're going to be an elder here, if you're going to be a teacher here, if you're going to be responsible for other people, we need to make sure that you're qualified, that you're mature, that you understand what we really believe and all. But it isn't a one size fits all. You have to have a complete understanding of our doctrinal absolutes before you step through the door. And that is more and more where we are. And I don't understand how that is going to effectively transform a culture that's as pluralistic as ours is. So anyway, all that gets me to what I wanted to land on, which is you wrote this other piece about cafeteria Catholics.
Yeah.
And I don't want to necessarily harp on the Catholics in this because I think it applies to all of us. But cafeteria Catholics are the idea that very, very, very few Catholics in the United States actually affirm everything that the Catholic Church is teaching. And they kind of go down the line and pick the doctrines or beliefs that they want, and they leave the ones they don't, hence the cafeteria approach. People do that in every denomination, every church structure. I like this, I don't like that. But how does that work now when our churches and denominations, even non-denominational churches, are increasingly being puritanical and you have to buy everything we are putting out? How do those two things reconcile?
The cafeteria, the Catholic Church actually has a really consistent position on certain social issues. They're for life. So beginning, middle, and end, anti-abortion. But I say anti-contraceptive, which actually I can appreciate. I actually I teach my students about religion and politics sometimes, and I tell them the Catholic doctrine. And when they hear they're anti-condom, I describe why, and they go, okay, I still don't agree with you, but at least I respect that position.
It's consistent, right?
It's consistent.
And same thing with capital punishment.
Exactly, because it's ending a life. We do not end life, and we do not believe in physician-assisted suicide because God is the author of life, and He gives and takes away. It's His call, not our call. They're also against unjust wars, which obviously is a gray area, but they're generally, kind of pacifistic on the issue of war and conflict, which all kind of emanates from the same source, right? Which is the idea that life is good, life's important. We should protect life. That's the problem, though, is we don't teach doctrine holistically like that. You know what I mean? So listen, here's our foundational belief. All you hear is we're anti-abortion. Can I tell you why we're anti-abortion? Here's why we're anti-capital punishment. Can I tell you why? In evangelicalism, I don't think we do a whole lot of that. We don't get down to the bare metal of where these ideas emanate from.
Yes, and in a lot of evangelicalism, at least the American white variety of evangelicalism, it's not nearly as consistent as the Catholic positions, because my read is so many people are taking their cues not from Christian history, doctrine, or scripture, but from political platforms. So the Republican Party might be pro-life, but it's also very much pro-death penalty and pro-gun. And so a lot of white evangelicals have taken that as the Christian position rather than looking historically at what has been the Christian position on guns, capital punishment, war, and abortion, and taking a consistent ethic. So those inconsistencies prevent us from presenting a doctrinally holistic approach, and so we don't do it.
Can I just say that one thing that heartens me about what the discussion that happened at SBC land last week was the possible addition of the Nicene Creed to the Baptist faith and message, which I think would be fantastic. Because what I teach, we say the Apostles' Creed in church every Sunday, which is just the shorter version of the Nicene Creed. It's a little bit older. Yeah. It's just a little simpler. I tell people, if you agree with me on this, then we play for the same team. Everything else is doctrine, not dogma, and we can disagree on doctrine all day long as we agree on dogma. And I think that's the problem is even Baptists are anti-creedal people, which I think is nonsense, by the way. We have creeds. It's just we don't we don't put them out there. We've got to at some point say, this is the basic thing of what we believe, and you believe this. We are in agreement. And then in a debate or discussion about same-sex marriage or women pastors, you can say, "Hey, do you believe in God the Father Almighty, the Creator of heaven and earth? You believe in one God? Do you believe in that? Okay, we put on the same team. Bye." and end the conversation, right? Like, don't get stuck on these secondary issues. And I think that's the bigger problem, is that evangelicalism has refused to create foundational concrete issues like that we can all come back to at the end of the day. It's just a shifting sand about, oh, we care about abortion now, we didn't care about it 50 years ago.
Well, it feels like we and I'm using the word we loosely because I wouldn't include myself in all this, but we do have some foundational issues. I mean, the SBC is a classic example of this. It's just an ever-growing list of them. Mm-hmm. And that's why more and more people feel like I can't be there. I might agree with the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or whatever. I may even agree with Baptist-specific kind of ideas, but I'm not on board with all of their political stances. I'm not on board with anti-IVF or whatever the issue is of the day. But they keep adding more and more of these, which your point is it's a purifying instinct, and they're driving people out. So what do you do with the fact that not just the SBC, but numerous other groups are increasingly defining who they are in clearer and clearer, more minute terms, and yet you have a population that wants to take the cafeteria style approach, and they're no longer being allowed? It's like, hey, this is what we're serving, like it or not, this is what you get. There is no more cafeteria for you.
So there's a really interesting exchange a couple of months ago between Perry Bacon, who writes for the Washington Post. He grew up in the black church. His dad was a pastor in the black church. And then he's basically become a nun over the last couple of years. Like, he's non-religious now. And we've talked about it before. And he wrote in his piece that he's a nun, but he misses church. Like, he misses the socialness of that. But he made this really interesting point. He goes, I don't want my daughter to go to a church where she'll hear something from the pulpit that I have to go explain to her. You know what I mean? Like, say we disagree with that when we go eat dinner after church service is over. And Ross Douthat had a nice kind of, he had a nice kind of critique of that. He said, yeah, but don't you want to be in spaces where you might hear something you disagree with, and your kids might hear something you could disagree with, and then you get to go in and my question is, where's the line, though? You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
If you're like a woman and you keep going to a church that says that you cannot be, you don't have access to leadership, at some point that becomes psychologically difficult for you to deal with, right? Especially if you got good theology training and stuff. Or, God forbid, you're LGBTQ and you're in a church that says that's a sinful behavior and lifestyle. Like, how much do you subject yourself to stuff that makes you feel less than? And I don't want to get into this whole discussion of like what is trauma and stuff. Like, don't willingly subject yourself to like constant psychological attacks on your character and your personhood. But at some point, you also need to expose yourself to views that you disagree with, argued articulately from people who have studied them carefully. So,
sure. I think what's changed, though, Ryan, and I agree with you totally. I've never been a part of a Christian community that 100% agrees with me, and vice versa. You probably haven't either, right? And I do think there's an enormous amount of value in being challenged or hearing ideas that are a little different from what you might hold or your family. And yesterday was Father's Day, and it's like one of the things I enjoy most about having teenage and young adult children now is the conversations we have about, oh, I heard this, or I read that, or I encountered this teaching, and what do we think about that? Great moments for fathering and formation, and I love it. It's great. So I don't stay away from that. But I think what's weird and what's changed is it's no longer just challenging people to go, hey, maybe you need to be part of a church community that is slightly divergent from what you hold, and it'd be good for your growth. But the shift is, when did pastors and church leaders start to say, I don't want anybody in my pews who disagrees with me? Mm-hmm. That's the weird part.
Oh, listen, I'm a Baptist for a reason, because we believe in soul competency in the priesthood of the believer, right? Which is basically the idea that God gave you enough good sense and the Holy Spirit to figure out your theology on your own. And you don't need me to get to God. You're your own priest. Like, I am not the intermediary. You have a great relationship with God, and I might get in the way of it sometimes. Like, I might not be what you want me to be. And so what that does from a pastoral perspective, when I preach, what I'll say is, here's what I think this passage means. Or here's how commentators have understood what's happening in this passage. And then here's another alternative theory about how they think about what's happening in this passage. It gives me more humility as a pastor to say, there are many ways. And by the way, the Jewish understanding of faith is like this. Like, they say it's like the scripture is like a jewel. You turn it and you see something different every time. It makes me think about my job as a pastor differently when I know that my people should not agree with me and don't have to agree with me to be part of a church. I just don't know when we here's what I'll say. When I hear a pastor stand up and go, this is what the word of God says, and this is what you have to believe, I go, feet don't fail me now. Let's head for the hills, man. Like, I'm out of here.
I think what you're describing in your teaching and preaching, and I think there are many, many faithful pastors who do this, is you're describing being a shepherd. Mm-hmm. You're leading the flock, you're guiding the flock, you're protecting the flock, but ultimately you're a shepherd. And the leadership model that seems to be gaining in popularity everywhere is not shepherd, but that of a soldier, of a commander who's saying, hey, fall in line or you're going to come under discipline. And when you're at war, shepherds don't lead sheep into war. But when your imagination of the world is one of we're in a battle against evil, I need a congregation of soldiers who are going to do what I tell them to do, and anyone who steps out of line is going to be court-martialed or hung. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where fundamentalists get their mindset from, and the leader is this general, this commander, rather than a caring shepherd who's guiding and nurturing and protecting and hopefully influencing, but it's not an order. It's influence. So that feels that's what it feels like to me is happening when I look at the absolute purity that's being called for now in increasing sectors, whether it's atheists or Southern Baptists. And that can't be good.
We have to fight that. I mean, I think that's part of the book is like saying, no, we've got to fight this urge to become more niche and more homogenous, and that is, to me, it's anti-democratic, little d democratic, but it's also anti-Christian. Like I just cannot, like, in my soul and my heart of hearts, I cannot believe a world is better when it's 30% true believers and 70% non-believers. Like, nothing in me says that's a good outcome from the kingdom of God perspective, but also from a democratic perspective, because how do you come to a compromise on something like abortion when you've got 30% of people think that women should be jailed for seeking abortion, and then 30% of people who think that women should, government should be paying for abortion, it's completely illegal up to 9 months, and you got people in the middle go, wait, I don't agree with you, or I don't agree with you, but you can't come to an agreement, like that. They're not going to budge on these issues. Like, how do you move forward as a society? By the way, the first fruits of that is what we saw with a speaker. We got rid of the speaker and we could not replace one for 3 weeks. Why? Because about 20 people in the Republican caucus said, no, it's my way or the highway. That impulse is not going away in American democracy and American religion going forward. And I think that's the problem, is most Americans on most issues are pragmatic. Whether it be women in leadership or abortion or same-sex marriage or whatever it is, you've got the 15% on each side who are like ideologues about these issues and will not bend and not compromise, and they're driving the debate, when most Americans sitting in the middle go, yeah, I think it's generally not great, but abortion, I'll make it legal to 12 weeks, Like, I agree. That's the problem.
I agree, and we got to wrap up here. But I think, again, from an economic point of view or a market point of view, there's a huge unserved population of people. Why isn't there more stuff happening to engage, collect, serve, and minister to that big middle? And I don't know, maybe it's too early and we'll see that happen. Ryan, thank you for being back. We're going to post in the show notes links to your articles, and hopefully more folks will become subscribers to your Substack page, Graphs About Religion. It's constantly fantastic stuff. They should definitely follow you on social media. And we'll have you back probably pretty soon before the election to talk more about the data that's coming out on all of that. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Sky. I appreciate it.
The HOLYPOST podcast is a production of HOLYPOST Media, produced by Mike Strelo, editing by Seth Gorvet. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by subscribing to HOLYPOST Plus at holypost.com/plus. Also, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, HOLYPOST merchandise, and much, much more.